The gavel struck the bench like thunder. "You're dismissed, Miss Joe, and let this be a warning," barked Judge Holloway, her voice sharp with authority. The room fell into a stunned silence. Alexa Joe, barely 23 and fresh out of law school, stood motionless. Her face remained calm, but her eyes burned with quiet fire. She gathered her notes, turned slowly, and whispered under her breath, "You'll regret this. My father's coming." To anyone else, it would have sounded like a desperate plea. But to those who knew her father, Billy Joe, it was a promise. This wasn't just a simple court proceeding. It was a setup. Alexa had dared to question the system from within, a system that protected the powerful and punished the honest. She'd uncovered something she wasn't supposed to see, and for that, they tried to silence her, to humiliate her publicly, to destroy her credibility before anyone would listen. But they underestimated one thing. Billy Joe wasn't just her father. He was a man forged in fire, an ex-Marine, a retired rancher, and once a relentless legal advocate who had walked away from the system after it failed someone he loved. Now, years later, he would return, not for vengeance, but for justice. This story isn't about revenge, it's about standing up when no one else will. It's about the unbreakable bond between a father and daughter, and how far one man will go to expose the truth. Stay with us until the end, because what happened after Alexa was expelled from that courtroom will leave you speechless. And if you believe in fighting back when the odds are stacked against you, make sure to subscribe. This is a story you'll never forget. 3 weeks before the courtroom debacle, Alexa Joe stood outside the towering glass doors of the Barton County Courthouse, clutching her internship badge with both pride and nerves. She had been selected from over 200 law students for a position that placed her in direct contact with Judge Margaret Holloway, a woman admired for her precision, her authority, and her ruthless interpretation of justice. To Alexa, this was an opportunity to learn from the best. She had no idea that she was walking straight into a den of wolves. At first, everything felt normal. She reviewed briefs, observed hearings, and even assisted in preparing case files. But then she noticed things that didn't quite add up. Missing documents, conflicting witness statements that were never questioned, and plea deals that favored powerful individuals tied to the local elite. Her instincts kicked in. Alexa had grown up hearing stories about her father's legendary fights for the underdog. Billy Joe always said, "Truth is only dangerous when lies hold the power." So when she stumbled across a sealed folder mislabeled in a drawer, she didn't hesitate. Inside were documents detailing a covert agreement between Judge Holloway and a real estate conglomerate, Fletcher and Rowe, who were quietly settling cases in their favor by steering them toward friendly rulings. In return, Holloway was allegedly receiving consulting fees through a shell company. Alexa didn't go to the press. She didn't call her father. She brought the folder to the court administrator, thinking it was a clerical mistake. That was her first mistake. Within 48 hours, she was reassigned to menial tasks. Her access was restricted. Rumors about her lack of professionalism began to spread. Then came the summons, an unexpected hearing where she was called not as an intern, but as a defendant in a disciplinary review. The hearing was quick, too quick. The charges: breach of confidentiality, tampering with evidence, and disrespecting the judicial chain of command. Her defense? Silenced. Every time she tried to speak, she was overruled. Her request for representation was denied. And then Judge Holloway looked her in the eye and delivered the blow. "You have no place in this courtroom, nor in any court where the law is respected." Alexa stood frozen. The humiliation was public. The press was present, invited, she suspected, to witness her fall. Every whisper, every camera flash, carved deeper into her confidence. As she walked out, her heart pounding, the folder now nowhere to be found, she realized she was up against something bigger than she could fight alone. Her body trembled, but her resolve began to solidify. That night, in a small, dimly lit cafe on the edge of town, she finally made the call. "Dad?" she said, voice shaking. "Lex," came the gravelly voice of Billy Joe, calm as ever. I need you." He didn't ask why, he just said, "I'm on my way." In that moment, a storm began to gather, not just for Holloway, but for everyone who thought Alexa Joe could be silenced. Because Billy Joe wasn't just coming to support his daughter, he was coming to tear down the walls of corruption, brick by brick, gavel by gavel. The sun was barely rising over the Texas plains when Billy Joe finished saddling up his old truck. The air was crisp, the scent of mesquite wood lingering from the night before. It had been years since he'd worn a tie, even longer since he'd set foot in a courthouse. But the call from his daughter the night before changed everything. Billy Joe wasn't a man easily rattled. A former Marine with 2 tours behind him, he had built a reputation in Barton County as a relentless advocate, someone who didn't care about titles, prestige, or pressure. His legal license was dusty, but still valid. After retiring to work his ranch, he'd traded courtroom brawls for cattle auctions and sunrises. Peace had finally found him, or so he thought. When Alexa called, there was something in her voice he hadn't heard before. Not fear, not defeat. It was something colder. Betrayal. He drove in silence, the miles rolling beneath his wheels like memories. The last time he had entered a courtroom, it was to defend a war buddy wrongfully accused he'd won. But the cost had been high. Enemies in high places, threats, and ultimately, a quiet decision to walk away before the system poisoned him any further. But Alexa was different. She still believed the law could serve the people, and now that belief had been weaponized against her. When he arrived in Barton City, it was mid-afternoon. He didn't call Alexa right away. Instead, he parked in front of the courthouse, the same one he used to walk into like it was his second home. Now it looked foreign, almost menacing. He lit a cigarette, leaning against his truck, eyes scanning the building like an old soldier returning to a battlefield. Inside, Alexa sat alone in her apartment, pacing. Her phone buzzed. "Come downstairs," Billy said. She rushed out and saw him, tall, weathered in a dark brown leather jacket holding 2 coffees. "You look tired," he said, handing her one. "You look like trouble," she replied, forcing a half smile. They didn't say much at first. No tears, no speeches, just the quiet understanding of 2 people who knew this fight was far from over. Back at her apartment, Alexa laid everything out, every note, every recording she had salvaged, every memory of what she had seen. Billy listened, didn't interrupt. When she was done, he nodded once. "You were right to call me, but this ain't just about you anymore." "What do you mean?" she asked. He leaned forward, eyes locked on hers. "If Judge Holloway is as dirty as this folder suggests, then you just cracked open something much bigger than a courtroom scandal. And trust me, they won't stop with just ruining your name. They'll bury you if they can." Alexa didn't flinch. "Then let's not let them." Billy gave a half grin, proud but worried. His daughter had his fire, but also his stubbornness. He opened his old leather case, pulling out a notepad, a pen, and a stack of faded business cards. "First thing tomorrow we dig. I know people who owe me favors. We'll find out who's really behind this." Alexa nodded, hope flickering in her eyes for the first time in days. But Billy's mind was already 10 steps ahead. He knew the rules of this game, knew that once you went up against the machine, you either came out with a win or never came out at all. As he looked out the window at the courthouse bathed in golden dusk, he murmured to himself, "You picked the wrong girl to frame, and the wrong man to underestimate." By sunrise, Billy Joe was already on his 2nd cup of black coffee, seated at a diner booth with a notebook full of scribbles and names circled in red ink. Alexa sat across from him, eyes still heavy from lack of sleep, but sharp with determination. The plan was simple, uncover the truth, but the path was anything but. Billy's first call was to Tommy Reed, a former investigative journalist turned independent blogger. Once a respected reporter at the Barton Gazette, Tommy had walked away from mainstream media after publishing a story about a senator's backroom deals, ironically the same senator who helped elevate Judge Holloway to her current position. They met in the back of a dusty bookstore, where the walls were lined with yellowing newspapers, and conspiracy theories were just another day's reading. "I thought you'd never come back," Tommy said, shaking Billy's hand. "I was done," Billy replied, "but now they've come for my daughter." Tommy raised an eyebrow. "That'll do it." Over the next hour, they spread Alexa's notes across a table, cross-referencing names, dates, and financial links. The picture that began to form was clear and disturbing. Holloway wasn't working alone. Several judgments she'd handed down in the last 18 months had favored entities connected to Fletcher & Rowe, a powerful real estate firm that had been gobbling up public land under the radar. These rulings weren't just biased, Tommy muttered, flipping through court records. They were scripted. Look at this, identical phrasing in multiple cases, word for word. Billy's jaw tightened. She's not judging, she's laundering verdicts. But uncovering the truth was one thing, proving it was another. Alexa returned to the courthouse under the guise of retrieving her personal belongings. There she noticed something that gave her pause. Two men in suits standing near the administration office, one of whom she remembered seeing at a Fletcher & Rowe event her department had attended months ago. Coincidence? Maybe. But in this game, there were no coincidences. Back at the apartment, Billy went to work. He reached out to a retired clerk named Eugene Marks, a man once feared for his razor-sharp memory and meticulous attention to courtroom details. Marks had kept unofficial copies of case summaries, just in case the official records magically changed. When Billy met him, the old man chuckled. "I knew it'd be you or nobody." "They've been rewriting history in that courthouse for years." Eugene handed him a small flash drive. "But be careful. People don't like their secrets being exposed." Billy thanked him and tucked it away. That night, he, Alexa, and Tommy began piecing together the data, cross-checking audio logs, file dates, and even witness testimony inconsistencies. The more they dug, the uglier it got. There were payoffs masked as consulting fees, corporate donations to campaign funds, and even evidence of judicial intimidation, where witnesses had recanted their statements after meeting privately with court-appointed mediators. Billy took a deep breath. "This isn't just a rigged system," he said. "It's a machine, and we just found the gears." Alexa leaned forward, her voice low but unwavering. "Then let's jam them." But just as hope began to flicker, a new challenge emerged. Tommy received a text from a blocked number. "Back off or lose your platform." His site went down within the hour. Their Wi-Fi cut out. Phone lines began dropping. It wasn't paranoia anymore, they were being watched. Billy closed his laptop with calm finality. "We go analog, we go silent. And we don't stop." They printed everything, hard copies, backups. They began to plan their next move carefully, knowing the system they were facing wasn't just unethical, it was dangerous. What started as a daughter's plea for help was now a full-blown war against a hidden network of legal puppeteers. And Billy Joe, he was just getting started. Judge Margaret Holloway had long been an enigma. To the public, she was the epitome of order, flawless in her rulings, elegant in demeanor, untouchable in reputation. But behind closed doors, a much darker truth whispered through the halls of Barton County's judicial system, and Billy Joe was now peeling back the layers. Late one evening, seated at Tommy Reed's cluttered office above an abandoned print shop, the trio huddled around a stack of archived news clippings, court transcripts, and campaign finance records. Alexa pointed at a photo of Holloway from 12 years ago, standing beside a man in a tailored blue suit. "That's Calvin Rowe, one of the founders of Fletcher & Rowe," she said. Tommy zoomed in on the laptop. She used to be his legal advisor before she became a judge. They scrubbed most of it from public records. Billy leaned forward. "So this didn't start with Alexa. It started long before. We're not just uncovering a crime, we're tracing a legacy." According to the records, Holloway's early legal career was intertwined with several corporations that benefited from her decisions once she took the bench. But the most damning detail came from a document Tommy found buried in an old campaign filing. A $150,000 donation listed under a fictitious construction firm, later traced back to, you guessed it, Fletcher & Rowe. The trio realized they weren't just fighting one judge. They were fighting a system built around her influence. Billy made a call to another old contact, Marla Greaves, a former court stenographer turned whistleblower who had left town after raising concerns about edited transcripts. They met her in a quiet motel an hour outside Barton. Marla looked older than her years, worn down by the weight of secrets she'd carried alone. "I tried to warn them," she said, voice trembling. "Tried to bring it to the board, but no one listened. Some even got promotions for staying quiet." She handed Billy a thick envelope. Inside were printed transcripts, originals she had saved, showing discrepancies between what was said in court and what was officially recorded in the files. Entire testimonies had been softened, omissions made to shift the narrative in favor of key players. Billy studied the papers. "This is enough to raise hell," Marla nodded, "but not enough to win. You need more than evidence. You need someone to break the silence from inside." Back in Barton, Tommy arranged a private interview with a clerk still working in the courthouse, who agreed to speak under anonymity. Hidden behind a voice modulator and a shadowed silhouette, the whistleblower confirmed it. Holloway personally oversaw revisions to certain case files. Any dissent was met with career-ending consequences. "She has eyes everywhere," the voice said. "Emails, phone logs, even internal memos, she has access to it all." Billy stared at the screen. "Then we need to find something she doesn't know we have." That's when Alexa remembered a USB she had tucked away, one she'd used weeks earlier to back up files for a routine audit. Among them were metadata logs from the courthouse server. At the time, she hadn't thought much of them. Now they revealed timestamps, logins into sealed files made after hours, using Holloway's personal credentials. Billy's eyes lit up. We just caught her with her hand in the cookie jar. But he also knew what came next. We've rattled her cage. She's going to hit back. And she did. The next morning, Alexa's name was smeared across a local tabloid, the headline reading, "Disgraced intern linked to digital theft." The story, full of anonymous quotes and vague accusations, was clearly planted. Tommy's phone buzzed with a cease and desist warning. Billy received a visit from a county investigator, subtly suggesting he back off for his own good. The noose was tightening, but Billy wasn't intimidated. If anything, he was more resolved than ever. "Let them come," he growled. "I've walked through worse storms." Because now they had more than suspicion. They had evidence. And with every new piece, the once imposing shadow of Judge Holloway began to crack. The pressure was mounting. News outlets had started circling the story, half fed by leaks from Holloway's camp, half curious about the sudden stir in Barton's usually quiet courthouse. Alexa stayed indoors, Billy moved cautiously, and Tommy doubled his security protocols. But the walls weren't closing in. They were shifting, revealing cracks in places no one expected. One such crack came in the form of Rosa Mendez, a rising star in the district attorney's office. Known for her tenacity and brutal honesty, she had built her career by sticking to facts, not favors. Rosa had reviewed the planted tabloid article about Alexa, and something didn't sit right. The phrasing, the sources, the timing. So she began digging on her own. When she showed up at Tommy's office unannounced, Alexa was immediately on guard. "If you're here to intimidate us, save your breath," she snapped. But Rosa calmly held up her badge. "I'm not here to shut you down. I think you're onto something, and I want in." Billy narrowed his eyes. "Why the sudden change of heart?" Rosa sighed. 2 months ago, I submitted a report questioning how certain high-profile cases were being assigned. My supervisor buried it. When I pressed again, I was reassigned. Lateral move, they called it. But now, seeing what's happening to you, I think it's part of the same rot." Tommy handed her a copy of the transcripts from Marla Greaves and the metadata logs Alexa had recovered. Rosa read in silence, her expression hardening with each page. "They're using the law like a scalpel," she muttered. "Precise, clean, and deadly." From that moment, she became an essential part of the team. Her access to internal records combined with her understanding of courtroom politics gave them a tactical edge. She quietly pulled sealed depositions, flagged suspicious case shuffles, and even identified a junior analyst who had been coerced into altering evidence logs. That analyst, Daniel Keyes, was only 25, barely out of law school, and visibly shaken when Rosa approached him. "I didn't want to," he confessed in a whisper. "They threatened my license and my family." Billy placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Son, you did the right thing by talking to us. Now help us set it right." With Daniel's cooperation, they obtained confirmation that Holloway's court had selectively removed motions and sealed counter-evidence before trial, systematically dismantling the defense in select civil cases. But that wasn't all. Rosa uncovered a previously unnoticed connection. One of the jurors in a major Fletcher and Rowe case, Linda Marlowe, had been placed on the panel through back-channel lobbying from a judge's clerk. On paper, it was clean. In reality, it was rigged. Billy shook his head. They've turned justice into theater. The outcome's decided before the curtain even rises. As they built their case, the group bonded through late nights, caffeine, and the shared fire of defiance. Rosa, once skeptical of Billy's cowboy law reputation, came to respect his instincts and grit. Alexa found solace in Rosa's strength, and Tommy, ever the cynic, admitted one evening, "Feels like we're finally playing offense." Still, Billy kept his guard up. Every win brought more attention, and attention, in this game, was dangerous. One night, as he walked back from a nearby diner, a black car slowly crept behind him. He turned a corner, ducked into an alley, and watched as it paused, then pulled away. He knew the message. "We see you." Back at the apartment, he said nothing, but Alexa noticed how he double-locked the door. "You okay?" she asked. "Fine," he replied, just remembering how war feels. The next morning, Rosa arrived with a sealed envelope. Inside were documents subpoenaed for an internal audit, but intercepted before they reached the ethics board. It included a memo signed by Holloway herself, authorizing alternate filing procedures for sensitive cases. This was it, the smoking gun. But Billy knew better than to celebrate. "We're close," he said. "Closer than they know. But the closer we get, the more dangerous it becomes. Because now they weren't just chasing shadows, they were bringing them into the light. The mood had shifted. Where once there was cautious momentum, now there was tension thick enough to slice with a knife. With every new revelation, every hidden connection exposed, the retaliation became more aggressive and more personal. It began with Rosa. She arrived at the courthouse early one morning to find her office door ajar. Inside, her desk had been rifled through. Files were missing, specifically the printouts she'd made of Holloway's authorization memo. No one claimed responsibility, and the security cameras for her hallway had mysteriously malfunctioned during the exact hours in question. Then came the suspension notice. Officially, it was pending review of ethical concerns. Unofficially, it was a warning. Back off. She called Billy from her car, her voice flat. "They've benched me." Billy didn't miss a beat. "Then you're officially on our team now." Meanwhile, Tommy's blog had mysteriously been flagged by hosting providers for content violations. After years of exposing corruption, he knew when something was targeted. Within hours, his entire site was offline, and his backups were locked behind paywalls he couldn't access without a court order. Then came the message, spray-painted across the side of his car in red letters. "Tell one more story and it'll be your last." Billy saw it and said nothing. Just clenched his jaw and pulled out his phone. "It's time we go dark, no more digital trails." He and Alexa began printing everything, thousands of pages, photos, receipts, logs. They packed them into sealed manila envelopes and stored them in 3 separate safe deposit boxes under different names. If anything happened, at least the truth wouldn't die with them. But the hardest blow came from someone they trusted. Daniel Keyes, the young analyst who had been helping them piece together the internal tampering, suddenly went silent. Texts unanswered, calls ignored. Then, 2 days later, Billy received a knock on the door. It was Daniel, accompanied by 2 county investigators. "Mr. Joe," one of them said, "we've received a report that you're in possession of stolen government property." Billy glanced at Daniel, who looked down, ashamed. He'd been coerced, likely promised immunity or even a promotion. They had been betrayed. Billy, calm as ever, opened his front door wider. "Come in, but I suggest you bring a bigger folder next time. I've got a lot more to show." The agents conducted a half-hearted search, found nothing incriminating, and left with veiled threats. When they were gone, Alexa stared at her father. "You knew he might flip," Billy nodded. "They always test the weakest link first." But despite the growing danger, something else was happening, something Holloway hadn't counted on. People were watching. Silently, cautiously, others within the system began passing along information. An unsigned envelope here, a discreet nod there. The fear was still real, but the veil of invincibility around Holloway was beginning to crack. One anonymous letter delivered to Rosa's apartment read simply, "Look into case 72C." Judge traded a verdict for land rights, and sure enough, buried in the archives was a case involving a family farm seized for unpaid taxes, taxes that had been artificially inflated by a Fletcher and Rowe subsidiary. Holloway had ruled in their favor, and within 3 months the land had been rezoned and flipped for triple its value. Alexa stared at the documents, a mix of rage and disbelief in her eyes. "They're not just corrupt," she said. "They're vultures." Billy nodded, and vultures don't like being dragged into the daylight. Still, the betrayals stung, especially Daniel's. Alexa had trusted him. Billy could see the fire dimming in her, the weight settling on her shoulders, so he did what he rarely did, opened up. "When I was in Afghanistan," he said one night, "we had a saying. When the bullets fly, you don't curse the coward. You just hold tighter to the ones still standing beside you." Alexa met his gaze. "Then let's hold tight, because I'm not backing down." Billy smiled just a little. "That's my girl." The storm was far from over. But now, with the first cracks spreading through the enemy's armor, they had one clear mission: strike before the next betrayal came. Billy Joe had never liked the spotlight, but as the pressure built and allies were silenced, he realized the only way to win this war was to step into it, loudly, visibly, and without hesitation. The plan was no longer just about gathering evidence. Now it was about forcing the system to face itself. The first step was to file a formal appeal for judicial misconduct. Not through the local channels, they were too compromised, but through the State Oversight Commission, a body outside Holloway's direct reach. It would force a review of her recent rulings and require her to respond to accusations under oath. Rosa, despite her suspension, guided them through the process from the sidelines. Billy filled out every form with surgical precision, attaching documents, transcripts, witness lists, and timestamps. When it was ready, he delivered it in person to the Commission's satellite office 2 counties over, with Tommy filming discreetly from a distance. "They'll try to bury it," Tommy warned. "Then we dig louder," Billy replied. Next, they prepared for the media. Not the tabloids or local newsrooms under Holloway's thumb, but independent outlets that still valued truth. Rosa contacted a former colleague at a national investigative program, someone who owed her a favor. The producer agreed to review the material. "We're not promising coverage," he said over the phone, "but if this checks out, it's explosive." Meanwhile, Alexa focused on preparing the testimony. If the appeal was accepted, there would be a hearing, and she would be the star witness. Every detail had to be airtight, every answer prepared. Billy walked her through mock hearings at night, playing both lawyer and devil's advocate. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" he asked after one long session. "I have to be," she said. "They tried to erase my name. I'm going to make sure they never forget it instead." As momentum built, Billy decided it was time to approach a man he hadn't spoken to in over a decade, Judge Marshall Briggs. Briggs was the antithesis of Holloway, an old-school constitutionalist known for his no-nonsense approach and unshakable sense of justice. Though semi-retired, he still presided over select appellate cases. If anyone could grant them a hearing that wouldn't be thrown out on technicalities, it was him. Billy showed up at Briggs' home unannounced. The judge, now in his late 60s, opened the door with cautious recognition. "Well, if it isn't the man who once called me too slow for justice," Briggs said dryly. Billy smirked. "Still not sorry about that." Briggs waved him in. Over black coffee and a fire crackling in the hearth, Billy laid it all out. When he finished, Briggs leaned back and rubbed his chin. "You're poking a bear, Joe." "More like pulling a serpent from its hole." Briggs considered the documents. "I can grant a preliminary hearing, but no grandstanding. This has to be clean, tight, and unshakable." You mess this up, and she walks stronger than ever. Understood. 2 days later, the hearing date was confirmed. In 1 week, they would face Holloway in a closed courtroom with Briggs presiding. The clock was ticking. Billy returned to the team with the news. The reaction was a mix of nerves and adrenaline. "This is it," Rosa said. "This is where it starts to break." Tommy nodded. "Or where it explodes." They split up for the final phase. Tommy gathered supporting media evidence. Rosa briefed 2 silent allies inside the DA's office. Alexa rehearsed her testimony again and again, determined to stay composed. And Billy. He spent an hour alone in his truck that night, staring at the courthouse. He wasn't a lawyer anymore, not officially, not by title. But in that moment, he felt every inch the warrior he once was. Only this time the battlefield was a courtroom and the weapon was truth. He whispered under his breath, "You took my daughter's voice. I'm here to give it back." The stage was set, the players were ready, and Judge Holloway, for the first time in years, would have to answer for everything. The week leading up to the hearing felt like walking through a minefield. Every moment held the weight of what was to come. But amidst the tension, the team pressed forward because they still lacked one final, undeniable blow, a piece of evidence so direct, so airtight, that not even Holloway's network could spin it. And it came from the last place they expected. While Rosa sifted through archived property records, she stumbled across a string of rezoning applications. Most were routine, until one name caught her eye, Esther Vaughan. Esther had once been a clerk for the city's zoning board, but had disappeared from public life years ago after an anonymous complaint accused her of misconduct. No charges were filed, no further details were released. It was like she'd been erased. Rosa brought it to Billy, who remembered the name immediately. She used to testify in land disputes, sharp, honest, then gone. Tommy worked his contacts, and within a day, they tracked Esther down in a rural town 3 hours south. She ran a small antique shop and looked startled when they showed up. But when they introduced themselves and explained what they were doing, her face changed. "I wondered how long it'd take," she said softly. In the back room of her store, surrounded by dusty clocks and faded portraits, Esther told her story. Years ago, she had flagged a set of zoning changes as irregular. Properties were being bought and flipped using legal loopholes she believed were fabricated. She sent a report to a senior official, who turned out to be working with Holloway. The next day, an anonymous complaint accused her of falsifying records. "Within 48 hours, I was forced out," she said. "No one returned my calls, my emails disappeared, and I got a letter suggesting I retire quietly for my own good. So I did." Alexa leaned forward. "Do you still have the report?" Esther reached under a loose floorboard and pulled out a weathered metal box. Inside was a hard copy of the report, a backup drive, and a notarized affidavit dated the day she was removed. It directly tied multiple fraudulent zoning decisions to Fletcher and Rowe, with Holloway's judicial approvals signed off as final authority. Billy held the document like it was gold. "Esther said this could change everything." She nodded. "That's why I never threw it away." Back in Barton, the team reviewed the report and added it to the official case file. Rosa flagged it for special submission to Judge Briggs under a confidentiality clause, ensuring it would be seen, even if someone tried to interfere again. That night, the group met in Alexa's apartment for one final strategy session. The whiteboard was filled with timelines, names, and connections. Boxes of evidence surrounded the room. It looked less like a home and more like a war room. Tommy paced. "Once we walk into that courtroom, there's no turning back. You realize that, right?" Alexa stood tall. "They already tried to take everything from me. What's left to lose?" Billy nodded approvingly. "And everything to win." Rosa tapped her fingers on the affidavit. "Tomorrow, we don't just accuse, we prove. We make it so public, so clear, that even her allies won't be able to defend her." For the first time in weeks, there was silence, not out of fear, but out of focus, the calm before the storm. Billy took a deep breath and looked at each of them. "We're not heroes, we're not martyrs. We're just people who got tired of being quiet." He stood, grabbing the final evidence binder and tucking it under his arm. Tomorrow, Holloway finds out what happens when the people she stepped on decide to stand up. Alexa looked at her father, eyes bright. "Are you ready?" Billy smiled. More than ever. As dawn approached, the courthouse loomed in the distance, bathed in pale morning light. Inside, Judge Briggs reviewed the sealed submissions. Holloway, unaware of what awaited, prepared her usual performance. And the public, still unaware of the fire about to ignite, would soon witness a reckoning. Because now, with every piece in place, the final act could begin. The courtroom was quiet, but not with peace. It was the kind of silence that buzzed with static, as if the very air was holding its breath. Judge Marshall Briggs sat at the bench, eyes scanning the packed room. Behind him, a towering wall of legal books stood like silent witnesses. In the gallery, journalists scribbled in notepads, cameras rolled discreetly, and legal aides murmured nervously. At the center of it all stood Alexa Joe, flanked by Rosa and Billy, her posture strong, her gaze forward. Across from them, Judge Holloway sat with her legal counsel, dressed in the same confident black robe that once commanded absolute respect. But her eyes, sharp and calculating, flickered with something new: unease. Briggs cleared his throat. "This hearing is now in session. The matter before us, allegations of judicial misconduct, fraud and evidence tampering regarding the Honorable Judge Margaret Holloway. Representation, please identify yourselves." Formalities passed quickly. Rosa spoke for Alexa. Holloway's attorney, a slick man in a designer suit, offered objections before any evidence had even been presented. Briggs silenced him with a glare. "Proceed," he ordered. Rosa rose first, calm, measured. She outlined the sequence of events that led to Alexa's expulsion from court, then began laying out the evidence. Metadata logs showing unauthorized file access, notarized affidavits from whistleblowers, conflicting versions of sealed transcripts. Each item was displayed on a monitor beside the bench. Billy watched Holloway closely. She kept her expression neutral, but her fingers tapped against her chair in a rhythm that betrayed her nerves. Then came the testimony. Alexa stepped up. Her voice didn't waver. She recounted the moment she found the hidden documents, the intimidation that followed, and the humiliation of being cast out publicly. She answered every question with precision, never emotional, always factual. Briggs leaned forward. "Miss Joe, can you confirm these login timestamps match the night after Judge Holloway's ruling in Case 48C? "Yes, Your Honor," Alexa replied. "Those files were supposed to be sealed, but someone entered them and altered attachments. The log shows her judicial ID. Holloway's lawyer objected, claiming the ID could have been used by an assistant." That's when Rosa dropped the next card, surveillance footage from the courthouse hallway. Grainy, time-stamped, but clear enough. Holloway entering her chambers after hours on the exact night in question, alone. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Still, Briggs said nothing. He only gestured for them to continue. Then came the documents from Esther Vaughan, the buried zoning report, the affidavit, and the trail of forged signatures. Each piece fell into place like bricks in a damning wall. When Holloway's lawyer stood to respond, his voice was tight. "This is a politically motivated witch hunt, led by a disgruntled intern and a retired attorney with a history of hostility toward this court." Billy stood. Slowly, deliberately. "With all due respect, Counselor, the only thing I'm hostile to is injustice." He walked to the center of the room, not to grandstand, but to speak directly to the man who mattered. "I served my country in places where the law didn't exist. I came home to believe in the system we built. But when that system turned on my daughter, I saw what too many Americans already know. The law only works when the people inside it have a spine." He held up a folder. "Everything we've shown today proves one thing. This wasn't an accident. It was a pattern, a structure built on fear, bribery, and silence. And if you let it stand, then the next person who tries to speak up will face what Alexa did, only worse." Briggs said nothing. The room was still. Finally, he spoke. "The evidence is sufficient to move to the next phase. A formal inquiry into Judge Holloway's conduct is now authorized." He banged the gavel. But Holloway wasn't done. She stood. "This is a farce," she snapped. I won't be railroaded by a girl and a washed-up cowboy lawyer with a personal vendetta. Briggs stared her down. Then I suggest you prepare a proper defense, Judge, because the storm is here. The silence that followed wasn't just quiet. It was the sound of power beginning to fall. The courtroom cleared, but the battle was far from over. Judge Holloway was no longer just a figure on the bench. She was now officially under investigation. And like any wounded animal backed into a corner, she began to lash out. That very night, Alexa received a letter slid under her apartment door. No return address, just one line handwritten, "Drop this or your father won't see the next sunrise." Billy read it twice, then crumpled it without a word. But his silence spoke volumes. Alexa knew what it meant. They were desperate. Tommy doubled security measures, installing cameras and using burner phones for communication. Rosa, despite being off duty, stayed close. No one walked alone. Every move was calculated. Then came the unexpected twist. 2 days after the hearing, Judge Holloway filed a countersuit, accusing Alexa and Billy of orchestrating a conspiracy to defame a public official. She claimed the evidence had been manufactured and that the testimony had been rehearsed for political gain. It was a last-ditch effort, a smokescreen, but it forced a response. Billy met with Briggs behind closed doors and requested that the rest of the evidence be made public. No more sealed files, no more internal whispers. The people deserved to know. Briggs was hesitant at first. If we go public, the backlash could be dangerous for everyone involved. Billy's eyes were steady. It already is. Briggs finally agreed. The next morning, a digital folder was released to the press with every document they'd gathered. Court logs, zoning fraud, whistleblower statements, surveillance footage, and the signed affidavit from Esther Vaughn. The fallout was immediate. News channels lit up. Hashtags trended. Civil rights groups demanded action. Public protests erupted outside the courthouse, not in rage but in support of Alexa Joe. People chanted her name. Signs read, "Truth isn't treason. We stand with Alexa." The tide had turned. Inside the DA's office, 3 silent prosecutors came forward, admitting they'd been coerced into case manipulation under Holloway's direction. One of them, under sworn affidavit, revealed that entire cases had been dismissed in exchange for property kickbacks. It was the crack in the dam they needed. Briggs convened an emergency session of the Ethics Committee. Cameras were allowed this time. Holloway was summoned to respond, and for the first time she stood alone, without allies, without scripted support. Her tone was different. The arrogance was gone, replaced by thinly veiled panic. "This is a media circus," she said. "These are unsubstantiated claims driven by personal vendettas." But the evidence said otherwise. Each item was presented methodically, witnessed by millions watching live. And when the surveillance footage played, showing her entering her chambers after hours, when only one keycard had been used, the silence in the room was damning. Briggs turned to her. "Do you deny this is you?" Holloway hesitated. "That video is taken out of context. The time, the location, the card, your signature on the edits," Briggs interrupted. "Are you denying the file was altered after that moment?" She swallowed hard. Her silence was louder than any denial. Then came the final blow. Esther Vaughn appeared, in person. She walked slowly, carrying the original folder that had been hidden for nearly a decade. Her voice trembled, but her words were clear. "I was threatened, discredited, and erased, but I kept the truth. And today I give it to the people who weren't afraid to fight for it." The room exploded in murmurs. Even Holloway's attorney looked shaken. Briggs called the room to order. "Given the overwhelming nature of this evidence and the corroborated testimonies, I am issuing a full suspension of Judge Holloway effective immediately. Further charges are to be determined by the Attorney General's office." The gavel struck. Alexa exhaled for the first time in days. Billy didn't smile. Not yet. He knew what this moment meant, but also what it didn't. The system had been wounded, not yet healed. As Holloway was quietly escorted out the back of the courtroom, head low, Billy whispered to Alexa, "You just changed the rules of the game." And for the first time, She believed it. The courthouse steps were no longer a place of shame for Alexa Joe. She walked down slowly, shoulders back, eyes steady. Not just as the young woman once cast out in silence, but as a symbol of what could happen when truth was louder than fear. The crowd parted around her, some clapping, others simply watching in awe. Beside her, Billy Joe remained quiet. He didn't crave the spotlight. His job, as he saw it, was never to be the hero, only the shield. But as he looked at his daughter, standing taller than ever, he allowed himself a small smile. Rosa was reinstated within days. Tommy's sight was restored and flooded with traffic. Esther Vaughan finally walked through town without turning her face away. And Judge Holloway, she was no longer a judge. Pending criminal investigation, her reputation lay in ruins, not because someone louder shouted over her, but because someone refused to stay silent under her. Back home, Billy returned to his porch swing, coffee in hand, watching the Texas sunset with Alexa beside him. "You think it's over?" she asked. "No," he replied, "but now they know we're not afraid to fight." She nodded. "I think I want to go back to law school." He looked at her and grinned. "Then let's sharpen your cross-examination skills. We start tomorrow." The screen fades to black, but a line appears in bold white letters. Truth doesn't need permission. It only needs courage. Then, if you want to see what happens when the system strikes back, let us know in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe. This is only the beginning.